on the right horse, and that's just the case in point. Game theory is another one.
Not using probability theory well enough.
What?
You're just not using probability.
Right, they're making bad bets.
Yeah.
No, they are making bad bets. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, Pete, wouldn't you still say that philosophical scruples are a big part of it? Like Rizzo and O'Driscoll in their book, essentially, but they only have a very brief period where they even mention the use of probability theory to analyze uncertainty, and they basically say that's the same as certainty. That gets them very upset. They say, to just say we know probability distribution rather than the real world is virtually equivalent to saying we know everything, which is a rather odd.
No, I mean, I think that look, there was a lot of mistakes made, and here's the problem. A lot, yeah, I think so. Because here's the problem: there's a German sociologist named Hans Albert, who was one of the forerunners of new institutional economics back in the 60s. And one of the things that he argued all the time was neoclassical economics will never be able to repair its institutional deficiency until it repairs its behavioral deficiency. And it's only in the last few years that economists have started to do that. When you think about the difference in the way that economists dealt with institutions in economics, and there's been a radical change. I mean, there's at this university, right? Public choice is in fact an outcome of the fact that other economists couldn't deal with institutions. And the public choice economists stepped inside of the black box. Vernon Smith is a consequence of this, showing that it's the institutions that drive the efficiency results, right? The framing of the experiment, not the behavioral capabilities of the agents within. In fact, what he demonstrates is that the less you know about economics, if given the right incentive mechanism, the better outcome you get. The only people who screw up are people like Bryan, who will try to outguess the game, right? If we study too much economics, we cheat every time in the prisoner's dilemma. And then we lose, right? We come in last place. So in fact, what's driving the results there are different. And that only has become part of the economics paradigm over the last 20 years or whatever. So the big thing is, in one of my classes on Austrian economics, I have the students read Samuelson's Principles book. It was an experiment a couple of years ago. Samuelson's Principles book, and Paul Milgram and Roberts' book on economic organization and management as sort of embodiments of what's currently cool in economics. Then Murray Rothbard and Israel Kirzner are the economics of time and ignorance. Now the thing that's interesting is there's a gulf the size of a sea between Samuelson and Rothbard. But by the time you get to Milgram and Roberts, economics has moved tremendously in the direction that Rothbard put it on, wanted to get it on. So economics has moved tremendously in the direction of the areas. And so I think that one of the ways that I would, in a more boring sort of moment, discuss with Bryan, like in a journal, is simply the idea that the term neoclassical economics is contested. It doesn't mean the same thing. Francis Bator's notion of neoclassical economics, or Paul Samuelson's notion, is a lot different than Paul Milgram and Roberts' notion, or Avner Greif, or any of the other people, Timur Kuran, or any of the other people who are currently practicing relatively mainstream economics, or Ben Bernanke for that matter, your teacher, right? I mean, he's a lot different than the macroeconomists that existed 25 years ago. So when Rothbard and all those guys used to make those arguments 25 years ago, they were right against those people, and now we have to recognize that other people have moved significantly in what? Rothbard's direction. Yay for Rothbard.
Not Kirzner's direction.
Well, to some extent in Kirzner's direction. I mean, when you look at all the stuff on creativity, look at the paper by Ostroy and but look at a paper in the Journal of Economic Literature by Joseph Ostroy on creativity. Look at Bommel's stuff on innovation. It's moved very much so. People recognize that creativity and entrepreneurship are part and parcel of the market process.
Yeah, you can recognize that without adopting any part of the Kirzner framework. I guess we should probably let someone else.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Hey, Francisco.
A couple questions. I don't know. Just taking on the last point by Professor Boettke. Okay, if mainstream economics is somehow approaching Austrian ideas, who's winning there? And to Professor Caplan, it's like, okay, even if you want to make a point that search theory encompasses all this discovery, entrepreneurship theory, well, in the very end, search theory is limited by the probability theory has limits. There's probability distributions that are not workable or are unknown, or they may be like new dimensions that come into the analysis. So search theory, just as mathematical models, is bounded by, okay, there's limits to mathematical reasoning, there's limits to probability theory, and that's where Austrian economics, where Austrian's point of view may hold some promise. The problem is that there's pretty much no Austrian who's talking to advanced probability theorists or mathematical theorists who can give them the tools, like, hey, this is where probability theory is weak, this is where mathematical theory is weak, you can exploit these ideas without your subjectivity or exploit your imagination here. So that will be my criticism to Professor Caplan. And my final question will be, okay, if we want to assert which of the 2 points of view this is more promising, I would like to know, okay, what cases are of mainstream economics, like how many mainstream economists are there that have switched to Austrians, and how many Austrian economists have turned into the mainstream? If you know of. I don't know any names of this list.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I was at a conference last weekend that's on Doug North's new manuscript. Now, Bryan will tell you that Doug North is all screwed up. But nevertheless, Doug North's a Nobel Prize winner and a significant economist in his own right. But that's not what's important in that is not what Doug North has gone to doing. But how many people have come to recognize more and more of these views? At this conference, there was very significant scholars like Avner Greif and Timur Kuran and other people who have all tried to incorporate within somewhat of a standard model aspects that come out of or flow out of the Austrian approach, which they self-consciously understand. Okay? Not only that, Vernon Smith is doing, as he's pointed out, half of his Nobel lecture to why it is that Hayek is the economist who's inspired him to move in the direction he did with his research. So I think that there's a lot of movement in a direction, and that the worst thing that Austrian economists can do is to deny completely this movement, because for the fear that the closer someone gets to me, the more they represent an enemy to me. Okay, and I think that's a mistake. The purpose, as I said, of a school of thought, to be vibrant, it needs to pollute itself with ideas for wherever they come from. And the thing that's weird about the Austrian school is that clearly Menger understood that, Mises understood that, Hayek understood that, but the modern American version didn't completely understand that. Because Mises devoted some of his most scathing criticisms to his own teachers and borrowing ideas from other people. So he wasn't worried about making sure he only said what Menger said, right? And I think that these are kind of ways in which a school of thought is promising, is the questions that it makes people ask. And I think that the Austrian school is extremely pregnant in that regard. Now, I should point out that when I read Hayek, I tell all the students that he's pregnant because he's confused, whereas when I read Sen and it's confusing, I tell him he's confused, So I think that there is a pregnancy in the Austrian writers, which sometimes I have a blind eye to other writers, that I hope people pick up on and work with.
Right, and just to respond to a totally different part of your question, right, in terms of improving probability theory, and it's true that you can also add in uncertainty about the number of dimensions, but that's no big theoretical problem. You also have a probability distribution over the number of dimensions. Right, that's also possible. I will say, I would certainly strongly bet against any Austrian doing anything to improve probability theory, because the complaint isn't that there is a problem with it, it's the whole idea that they don't like. The very idea that you're bringing it in is somehow sullying the great tradition.
Can I just say something? Is that really true, or is it just the case that they argue? Because I don't know any Austrian who says people are never maximizing.
Well,
It just depends on the situation in which they are.
Both Mises and Rothbard do essentially say that the quantifiable probability can only be applied to games of games of chance, cards, dice, so on. And then, of course, even there, when you read more deeply, you realize even then it's not any real game of chance, because any real game of chance, you don't know about the trustworthiness of the